Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A segment 167. What?
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Here we are, Dr. Bret Weinstein, Dr. Heather Hying, back with you again. We are going to keep this tight today because we went on and on and on and on
We went on at length.
In that first hour. Okay, so from the Discord, that we start every hour, every one of these with a question from the Discord server every week. If you want to be in on that, you should join one of our Patreons and get access to the Discord. We have this week a choice between two, and I like them both. I'm just going to go with the first one. Both of them warrant a lot more than a off-the-cuff answer, but let's give this a shot. Writers are often considered lazy or unimaginative or anthropocentric when depicting intelligent alien life as too similar to humans. But won't there be some or even many features that end up accompanying intelligence when it happens to develop? How different should we really expect intelligent alien civilizations to be? So I wrote an entire yet unpublished science fiction novel investigating exactly this question. And I do think that there are different levels of similarity. So this question seems to be getting at like the intelligence, like what will the intelligence be like? But in terms of the form, it's easier to critique, and the critiques that I hear more often are about the form that the organisms take, like the anatomy and physiology. And there is no reason to expect that anatomically and physiologically intelligent life that evolves somewhere else from totally different information molecules, not from DNA, from the same original building blocks if you go back far enough, but it might not even be carbon-based, right? There's just any number of forms that intelligent life could take. So more often you hear critique about organisms, other intelligent life looking, being bipedal, having two eyes. Now, if you've got eyes at all, you probably are going to have two of them rather than one, and they're probably going to be facing forward so that you can do depth perception. So there are some things like having two pairs of things so that you can triangulate with regard to your sense organs, two nostrils, two ears, two eyes. But the overall form, we shouldn't expect inherently to repeat.
I think you have to be open to the possibility that things will not repeat. On the other hand, the number of ways to build something functional is more limited than it seems. There are lots of canonical forms,
but radial symmetry is a canonical form.
Yep. But there's a question about whether or not an intelligent creature is likely to have some of the characteristics that we have for reasons that may be less than obvious. And so...
But I mean, to your point that you raised in the first thing that we did today, I want to say the first hour, it's not right. Octopus.
Yep.
Don't look anything like us.
Yep.
Right? They've not only got radial symmetry, but they've got an ability to... Their sense organs, everything about what they do is just different.
Right.
And yet they're highly intelligent.
Right.
And that's on this planet.
Right. But they've got an image-forming eye of a separate genesis that functions very similarly, with an improvement, actually.
Right. So image-forming eyes.
Yep.
Built of different stuff. They may look different. Will that show up on another planet with intelligent life? Yes. Will organisms that are highly intelligent have more than one of them? Probably yes.
Right.
Right.
All I'm saying is I think you have to be open to any level of difference, but should expect certain surprising similarities. So, I don't want to get boxed into saying, oh, it will be similar, because it can be very, very different. But all I'm getting at is that the stuff that led to our intelligence may be more
constrained.
Yeah.
But what? I mean, that's what the question is. So what do you think then?
Well, I think emergent consciousness is highly likely. That emergent consciousness is pretty likely to involve something, a mechanism that is not... I wouldn't be surprised to see communication via sound. I wouldn't be surprised to see a pair of ears, a pair of eyes. I wouldn't be surprised to see two sexes. I wouldn't be surprised to see sleep.
Two sexes, sleep, sensory organs that may use the same primary senses that we do, or may use electricity or magnetism or some of the things that some other organisms on this planet use, but that we don't so much, or that see outside of our what we call the visible spectrum,
Sure.
only because it's visible for us. So yes, sensing the world by those things that are sensible will happen, and it may not look the way it does for us, but there is a limited number of things that are sensible.
Right. So, life is almost certain to happen around a star that puts out light. That leaves a inexpensive mechanism for figuring out where the other objects in the world are.
Right, but the kinds of stars that could produce that could have planetary systems around them, that could have life on them, are actually somewhat variable and have different spectra that they emit, and therefore the color sensing and the temperature range in which these organisms may live, and therefore what kinds of forms they could take, could be wildly different.
Well, it's the point where you say, I'm open to any level of difference, but to the extent that it is likely that given that photons are going to be free, that is to say, you don't have to pay a cost for generating them the way you do with echolocation, that one possibility is that you will see creatures that take advantage of the photons bouncing around, that process the location information about objects in ways that are liable to discover the same mechanisms that we have, and may be sensitive to different spectra, sure, may not be color sensitive, probably, to the extent that...
I think there will be color sensitivity, quickly evolving wherever you have light sensitivity, and light sensitivity will evolve quickly.
Yeah,
but it will be, but it may well be different, and therefore reveal the world in a different way.
Yeah, but that would be a small difference. To the extent, I guess I'm proceeding from what happened when we invented sonar and then discovered how the sonar of a bat works. The answer was actually there were certain canonical problems that we solved very similarly to the way that bats had solved them.
Yep.
And therefore the parallelism had nothing to do with biotic parallelism. It just had to do with the fact that you've got certain kinds of information that has to be processed in certain ways, and there are most logical ways to do it, and an engineer can figure it out, and selection can figure it out.
But I would say, I guess, in terms of locomotion, respiration, even probably neurological, like, whatever all might be encompassed in that capacity, digestion, food acquisition as part of the digestive process, all of those could be wildly different on a different planet with different originating conditions. And we know that in part because all of those things, we have examples of wildly different things on Earth.
Yep.
I agree that I think sensory systems, sleep is going to be a surprising one to people, but we make this argument in the book, in Hunter Gatherer's Guide, that sleep is likely to be a universal for any aliens that show up on Earth are going to understand sleep just fine. There are plenty of things about us that they won't necessarily have familiarity with, but sleep they'll get. Dreams as well, right? I would guess, if a centralized brain, and there doesn't need to be a centralized brain, but if a centralized brain, the thing that we do with lateralization and then tying it back together with the corpus callosum, so that you can both have separate and unified at the same time and in varying degrees, is very useful. Of course, another way to accomplish that would be something like, an insect model of having, a lot of different systems that are connected to one another, but there's not one central neurological clearinghouse. So, the CNS, the central nervous system of some differently evolved intelligent life form, could look wildly different, but will they have sensory input coming in? Yes. Will they have motor input and motor output? Yes. Is there going to be highly intelligent life that can't move?
No, because you need the feedback. It's got to do something
Yeah.
equivalent to
I
thinking.
was going to say, maybe at one life stage, maybe. Like, just like babies, right? But no. So there's going to be sensory and motor, but it might happen very, very differently. But there will be those things. But that's pretty broad.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not sure how far to go. I'm open to any level of difference. I expect to see surprising similarities, and I actually don't expect that we're going to get a chance, but I wish we would.
It'd be great. Okay. First question from DarkHorseSubmissions.com. Tiny disruptions to fetal neural development cause schizophrenic thought disorder and severe problems with logical inference. Could microplastics or other toxins be disrupting neural development and therefore the true cause of much of the illogicality of the woke? Could wokeness be a neuropsychiatric dysfunction? So let me just say the initial sentence is a claim.
Yep.
That sounds right to me, but I don't know that it's correct, and there's no reference, and the word tiny strikes me as a little bit too far, probably. So if we take off the word tiny, I'm just going to repeat the claim, which is that disruptions to fetal neural development cause schizophrenic thought disorder and severe problems with logical inference. I won't say it sounds right. It sounds plausible, but I've never heard that before, and I don't know. I would be surprised if we actually had the tools to assess, because it's such a complex system with so many inputs at the baby level, that how do you know at the point later that you've got schizophrenia that it's because of disruptions to fetal neural development. So
I want to know what that claim is based on.
Yeah, so that's a claim that the question is starting with, that we are saying maybe, but we don't know. However, the rest of the question reads, could microplastics or other toxins be disrupting neural development and therefore the true cause of much of the illogicality of the woke? Could wokeness be a neuropsychiatric dysfunction? I think there's something here, and I wouldn't say the woke specifically. I wouldn't say, I think, as we alluded to, I've talked about not microplastics, but endocrine disruptors, both estrogens in the water and endocrine disruptors in the water may be deranging us endocrinologically, may be partially responsible for a tremendously larger number of people actually being confused about not feeling like they are the sex that they are. I don't think it's by any means the only thing going on, nor do I think it's primary, but I do think that it's a problem. So plastics.
Yeah, I do think we are disrupting all kinds of things, and that gender confusion is maybe partially downstream of it. But I also think you've got informational chaos and a developmental environment that does not provide proper feedback. When you screw up thinking about something, you're supposed to get hurt, and that is supposed to cause you to get better at thinking. Mm-hmm. And when we have a system in which your confusion about whatever it is, fostered by a civilization that is equally confused and interested in you remaining confused, it's not surprising that you end up confused. So we've got universities that are teaching you that what 2 + 2 = is up for debate, that pedophilia may not be a bad thing, that men can become women. So that is a system that is both cause and effect. Yes, confused people are in that system, but it is also a system that is going to cause confusion, and it doesn't require anything chemical, right? It's basically a failure of the feedbacks that are supposed to make us get smarter, which, life has gotten very easy, and that has caused bad thinking to get purged less well.
Yeah. That said, to the actual question, could there be some effectively ecotoxicity that is contributing to mass confusion? Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
And I think it's more likely to, you've got a couple different ways that could work. You could get endocrinological confusion over sex stuff because there are so many xenoestrogens. You could get depression of intelligence. You could get the disruption of the formation of intelligence. Lead produces a decrease in the capacity to think. And there is a part of me, forgotten what topic I was on, but I was thinking earlier this week about the confusion that happens to people when they climb to very high altitudes or high elevations.
Yeah.
Where basically the hypoxia causes them to make bad decisions about climbing and descending and stuff like that, and it gets people killed. And I'm looking at civilization, and we're doing a lot of stuff that could get us killed, and I'm feeling like if we had hypoxia, would we know it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit too close for comfort. A level of confusion does strike me like what might happen to oxygen-starved brains. And I'm not arguing it's oxygen starvation.
Right.
But the equivalent, yes, people are very, very confused. And it's, if you were in a room where the breathable air was polluted or low in oxygen, do you reason well enough to get yourself out of the room, or do you succumb to it?
Well, some number of people look around, and at the point they don't see anyone else panicking or leaving, they decide that it's just them.
Yep.
And they ash conformity their way into death.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't. The person asking the question had the Tdap vaccination 2 times in 5 years, but I was still told to get it while pregnant. I got Titers instead. The doctor never had anyone ask for Titers, and they weren't covered by insurance. That's not a question, but a statement. I feel like we were asked something last week.
Yeah.
About whether or not to get. I think it was the Tdap during pregnancy, and our sense was why you would be getting any vaccine while you're pregnant. I don't know, and it's not. Is there plausibly some situation which might arise where that would be the right move? Okay, sure. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah. I'm just saying it's not a blanket, like absolutely no way, under absolutely no conditions could that ever be the right move. But the default assumption has to be that's not going to be good for your baby, and it should wait. It should wait until you don't have the baby literally on board.
In order to get there, it would have to be a disease with a strong likelihood that you would get it.
Yep.
A huge effect of the vaccine on your ability to tolerate the disease, a low indication, an affirmative low indication of harm to fetuses, which would almost never be good enough.
Yeah.
But, in other words, if the disease that you're vaccinating for is not rampant, then it doesn't make sense to take that risk, even if in principle were it to get you, it would be critically bad for you and or your fetus if it's not out there in the environment. But if it is out there,
behavioral modifications first.
If it is out there in the environment, then there's a strong argument that you don't want to be giving it anyway, because you don't want to provide an evolutionary landscape for the thing. You don't want to encounter it while you're partially immune. So it would have to be something like there was an outbreak of a terrible disease in a place that meant that you had a limited period of time in which to gain immunity before you would be likely to encounter it. And that if we vaccinate you now, you'll have the immunity by the time you encounter it. And if we don't vaccinate you now, you're liable to encounter it and fare badly. So that's unlikely.
Yeah.
And
that is a possible scenario. And, it also requires that, the vaccine is actually safe and effective, and the disease has a high, is highly risky.
Safe and effective as far as we know. And then
to both you and, to both mother and fetus.
It's very hard for me to see the argument for this in the case of a pregnant person.
Yeah. And, to the comment, yes, get your titers done. We've talked about this before, but, we're both vaccinated against rabies, and I think at 10 years it's recommended, and it's been a while since we've done it at this point, but at some point 10 years after we were originally vaccinated, they didn't, I don't even remember where this would have been, but they, whoever the doctors were, did not say, go get your next rabies vaccinations because it's been 10 years. They said, get your titers checked and see, because there's a good chance if you've got healthy immune systems that you were vaccinated 10 years ago, you still got good immunity. And sure enough, we did.
Yep.
So for all of these, the idea of like, oh, it's just been X amount of time, therefore you need Y shot. No, like we're all different human beings with different kinds of immune systems in terms of their health and their ability to hang on to immunity. And we, in any of these cases, we should be able to check titers before we agree to another shot.
Yeah. I have one concern about titers, which is that it's antibody focused.
Is it entirely?
And that's what they're checking.
That is. Okay.
Which,
didn't know.
Antibodies is part of a story.
Yep.
T cells are the other part of the story. And so it's not, my guess is if you've got...
Is that a better indication many years out or no? Like if you've still got antibodies a long ways out, isn't that a better indicator?
Yes, it's
right?
more likely that your antibody reaction will fade while you still have T cell immunity, I believe.
Yeah.
But in general, the degree to which we do not leverage titers and we just inflict shots on you because they're presumed safe is suspicious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have advice for raising two boys less than 2 years apart, helping them get along?
Well, I've got a piece of advice.
Well, first I will say that our boys are technically less than 2 years apart, but by like 9 days.
Nonetheless, I think our experience is relevant enough.
But they did great.
They did great. We did have them in the same room for most of their early childhood.
Yeah, we never let them out. They're just in that room for, I think it was 8 years. And then we opened the door, like, look at the sun.
Look, I mean,
no, they slept in the same room. They had the same room.
Yes, they had the same room. And that...
No, and actually it was until they were like 14 and 12, something like that. 11 and 13, 14, 12, something like that. Yeah.
Yep. And, I don't know what happens if your kids don't get along, but my sense is good parenting results in kids getting along, and having them in the same room causes you to work stuff out.
Yep. No, and they became, they're almost always good to one another. And when on occasion they weren't, we encouraged or demanded that they deal with it first. That, we were not the first line of defense for them against each other ever. They were expected to interact with one another first and foremost as the other human being in the interaction, and that should hold for any of the interactions. That if the parent is constantly coming in and solving problems for the kid, then the kid learns that they don't have to solve the problems for themselves. And certainly getting in between siblings as they are developing knowledge of how to interact with peers is going to be counterproductive. Anything else?
I don't think so.
Well, we're just going to run through all these questions very, very quickly. You don't have much to say.
Well, I'm not sure what to say. Okay. We have 2 kids. We did a lot of stuff that was different. We talked to them like they were adults, which was hilarious at first, and then resulted in both of them talking back like adults, which I think is good. Don't protect them from everything. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know that we can say very much about them getting along, because they do get along. And
this is not just about, do we have advice? And, yes, we have an anecdote in terms of our family, but I guess I would say also that boys are more likely than girls probably to get physical with one another, and let them, right? Like, don't stop that every time it happens, and give them the space to do so. And sure, if it's not dangerous outside, encourage them to do it outside, but do not shy away from their interest in being physical at all. And that's part of how they're learning, how to use their bodies and how to be in the world.
Yep.
Have you heard of electracy? A proposed step post-orality and literacy by Greg Ulmer. It explains the web as a spirit world where lack of ritual and care lead to possession, as in by spirits or mimetic ideas. So that's sort of, obviously, I've never heard of this before, and there's a language of, sort of a woo language here, but the idea that we are actually living in a third phase, and some have proposed that it's that the web world is more like an oral culture, less like a literate culture, and more like an oral culture. But the idea that it's got the rules of some third type of society is interesting, and I think I don't have enough information here to say much more than that.
Yeah, I would say...
Have you heard of it?
No.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a vacuum that comes from not having a tradition conveyed to offspring, right? There's an empty space niche-wise in the soul, and it is not surprising that it gets filled with lots of garbage in an online world where people are free to float whatever version of here's how to be a human being they are persuaded by. So, this is a version of the religion-shaped hole, right? Religion, and I also think it is the case that in recent history, in the last few years, we have watched religious people very frequently outcompete secular folks with respect to resisting bad thinking that was being inflicted on them by governments and large institutions, newspapers, and the coordinated narrative that came from all of those things. So, as we've talked about extensively, even scientifically minded people need to figure out what to do with the fraction of the model of the universe that we can't fill in, right? Which is not really a God of the gaps argument. But the point is, you have to be able to think carefully about this and carefully about that, knowing that you don't know what goes in between them. And you have to have some way to give yourself license to jump in that. If you convince yourself that it's all one unified story and that you are in on it, then you're going to end up telling yourself a lot of lies at the places where we really don't know what's going on. So religious people have a very easy one, right? They are licensed to jump any gap because they in general believe in a marvelous creator. And so here are the things we understand and here are the things we don't, and we're comfortable with mystery. So if you put God aside on the basis that he, she, or it fails to exist, and you leave open, therefore, well, how am I going to deal with the mystery part of what I'm faced with? It's not surprising that people get parasitized by bad thinking. It's a vulnerability. And so anyway, I'm not sure I would describe it according to the taxonomy that the person asking the question has presented. That does sound a bit woo, but yeah, there's something going on with memes, beliefs that have not stood the test of time being way more contagious than they should be by virtue of a mind opened by atheism and then exposed to fads.
Yes. I'm trying to remember. I don't have time to dig into my computer here and find it, but there are some generalities put together by, I think it's Walter Ong, who wrote this classic treatise, Orality to Literacy, in the 60s, maybe late 50s, 60s, early 70s, something like that, in which he describes the sort of the canonical, if you will, to use the word of the day here, true things about oral cultures versus literate cultures. And I would have to go back and remind myself of some of the differences between them, but one of the things may, no, I'm going to misspeak if I try to pull up any of them from memory because it's been a while. But the idea that there might be a third list, a third set of structures of ways that we tend to interact with one another in this world that is dominated by, I don't know, this says the web. Maybe it's more than the web, it's social media. Some I don't know exactly what the descriptor is, like what the fundamental thing, whereas an oral culture versus a literate culture, you can tell what the distinction is. So, what portion of your world are you engaging in on the web that makes it like that kind of a culture? The idea that there might be distinguishing features, and maybe it's not like a return to an oral type of a culture, but actually a different thing is intriguing to me, and I'd like to know more.
Yep. And whatever is going on in the AI space is going to disrupt this because it's going to be possible to be a very articulate parrot, right? You're going to be able to say wonderfully intelligent things that you don't really understand or that you think you thought of, but you didn't. You got it from this artificial intelligence. And
and it's not, people don't, there won't be the same taboo against plagiarizing an AI, right? Like if you hear it, if you go online and you do something and it comes up on Quora, you're like, well, okay, most people will have the sense of like, well, I got to attribute this, like this is where I heard this, or like, because they know there's a person behind it. There's a person who wrote that thing to them. Whereas not, knowing that thing isn't a person sort of takes away the responsibility to honor it with attribution.
Yeah, well, in part, people react badly if you plagiarize them.
Right.
The AI presumably doesn't care.
Right.
And so people will be liberated. They will not get the feedback of doing it. And I do.
And it won't be as trackable either, right? Like
I don't even think they will understand.
They who? The AI
people,
or the people?
The people. They're not going to know what they're doing. They're going to think they are saying intelligent things because they're going to get a reaction from other people as if they're saying intelligent things. And they are technically saying them, but it's like reading them. It's like reading Shakespeare and not understanding what you're saying. Right?
Yeah. Like reading it just for the meter or something.
You could imitate somebody's presentation of Shakespeare that was very good.
Emotive in the right place.
Right. And the audience might love it.
Yeah.
And the point is, oh, I'm pretty good with Shakespeare. Really? Maybe you're not. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm very concerned that people are going to take the issue of you have to take what you deserve credit for very seriously and not lie to yourself about it in order to get smarter. And the fact that there's something that probably is not going to enforce this, everybody has access to it, and so people are going to leap to put things into the public discussion quickly that they've gotten from the AI. I just don't see how this can't. I don't see how it's going to avoid ending very, very badly.
Yeah. Many fantasy creatures have pointed ears. For instance, orcs and elves. What evolutionary benefit does this provide, and why don't we have them? I love this question. My first reaction was, well, they're cute. They're so cute. Okay, but why do we find them cute? Why do we find them cute? We find them cute in part because mammals so external pinnae, which is the technical term for ears. Obviously, we have internal things that we call ears, but the external thing that we call ears, which for some reason we use the same word for, are technically called pinnae. That's the fleshy part that you can see. That's a mammal synapomorphy. That's a shared derived characteristic of mammals and only mammals. And so imagine, a cat or a mouse or a bunny rabbit or even a giraffe. And you can see them and they flick their ears. What is it? The caracal that does the, my God, just the most beautiful ear move ever with a really long tuft at the end. And But all of these animals, if you watch them in real time, but then especially if you watch a slow motion video of them, they're just doing interesting things with their ears that are, yes, them sensing the environment, but also, therefore, if you're paying the right kind of attention to them, you can pick up on ways that they are interacting with the environment. And maybe they're communicating with them. Sometimes they're actually using their ear movements to communicate, but more often they're using their ear movements to sense the outside world, and then that can give you a sense of what it is they're doing. Ours are plastered against our head and not attractive. Sorry, all you ear fetishists out there, but like, compared to a cat's ears, sorry, we don't have it going on. And it would be adorable if I don't know about the elf thing with them still plastered against the head. It seems to me that there's no functionality to that at all. But if they're up here and if
you can move them.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Think it's actually about aim. And the idea is the pointed ear, for a creature that can pivot its ear, the ability to tune in and therefore tune out things that are adjacent sound-wise is a critical capacity. And so creatures with very acute, so for us, we can point an ear by pointing our head, but you can't isolate a sound that way. Or at least not very well. But an animal that can point one ear, and swing it so it points in only that direction and therefore tunes in, the same way you pivot your eyes to look, at somewhere with your fovea. I think it has that function, and so why we don't have them is because we don't have the ability to move our ears separately and tune into a particular sound. But I think we find it cute because creatures that do have them are cute. A fox is a very lovely creature, and it has some very pointy ears. And so we infer.
But that seems circular to me. Why do we find them cute?
Well, we find lots of things cute because they trigger. I was going to say because it triggers, parental reflexes, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, they're.
Yeah, I don't quite have it.
Yeah, I don't quite have it either.
And also, I realized that some of the examples I gave just have the pointing up ears, but they're not, like mouse ears aren't pointy, they're rounded. And, rabbit ears aren't pointed. They're elongate, but they're not pointed. But I think most people would agree that they're cute too. And they also do, they do this independent movement thing. And I honestly having a hard time visualizing an orc at the moment. I don't remember where their ears are in their heads. Elves, it's. I think that's very unlikely to have happened. Actually, pointed ears that are basically plastered against the side of your head, unless there is some ability to do this, which maybe that is what elves are supposed to be able to do. I don't know. I'm not familiar with elven lore.
No, I agree with you that you shouldn't expect to see the pointedness unless it has a separate reason for existing. The pointedness should go hand in hand with the ability to pivot
unless they've got like the caracal things on them, and it's just a display.
In the caracal case, I think it is.
No, but elven ears with the tufts on them, so they're using the points to display their awesomeness to each other.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Let's see. We have a 3-part question from Echo here. Aspirin, acetylsalicylic acid, was the miracle drug. Aspirin, acetylsalicylic acid, was the miracle drug propaganda about patenting. It's inspired by white willow bark, salicylic acid, used by ancient Sumerians and Egyptians. NB. Hydroxychloroquine is inspired by Artemisia annua, used in Asia and Africa against paludism, whose use WHO formally discouraged in 2012, with many papers against Artemisia annua to force people to buy hydroxychloroquine, which is more concentrated.
So I'm getting something out of this.
Yeah. I'm also reading it, and for some reason they're not in the right order, so I'm having to jump around here. So I think. Well, you want to riff a little bit? I'm trying to figure out what.
So far, all I've gotten is that there's a tendency to propagandize it's some version of the pharma game where there's a tendency to propagandize the usefulness of a molecule, the safety of a molecule.
Well, that's the question. Was the miracle drug propaganda? This is from last week, right? About patenting. And if I remember correctly, I think actually it had just fallen out of patent. I think Bayer had patented aspirin originally. And at the point that the Spanish flu came, it was just out of patent. And so now more widely available to be produced by others. I think. I'm not positive about that, but I think it was not a patent game at that point.
Sounds to me from the question, I can't speak to which version it is, that maybe acetyl salicylic acid was the replacement for salicylic acid from willow bark, and that might have reinvigorated or provided the opportunity for patenting. So I don't know. The question is, did Bayer have a patent at the point that the Spanish flu was rampant? And I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I think it had just ended. But, the game with the two forms of chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine, I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me if it's true. And the fact that game is played isn't inherently egregious, but it is our job. That this is what organizations like the FDA are supposed to be monitoring and taking care of. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Of course, people will do this.
I think that of course people will do it. I do think it's egregious.
Well, yeah, but that's what the organizations like the FDA. That's what the governmental organizations are supposed to take care of.
Well, but we're caught in a bind where we have the profit motive in places that it does not belong. Right? If the job of making people healthy is really what medicine is about, then the point is the move of trying to convince people to take this molecule rather than that molecule because you have a patent on it should be illegal. Either this is a public phenomenon, in which case profit ought to be taken out of it because health is too important, or it's buyer beware. And what we have is the worst of both worlds, where we have the patent game, the pharma game, we have the capturing of the regulators game, and we are not, what happened to buyer beware in the era of COVID? We weren't allowed to beware. It was actually formally declared misinformative to try to watch out for your own interests, right?
Right.
To listen to people who dissented. So, it is the destruction of the instinct to make people healthier and the replacement of that instinct by some remote entity's desire to make money. And it is egregious. So I want one or the other. I either want to know that I'm, getting a sales pitch, that I should ignore it, or I want to know that this has nothing to do with profit because it would be impossible for anyone to make one. I don't want to be shamed for noticing that somebody is making a profit for their mandated product that is being inflicted on me despite having been poorly tested by the very people who are making that money.
Yeah. And that's you being unreasonable again.
Once again.
I'm not sure what to make of this, but I'm gonna read it. It's in two parts. My own research asks, did Elton misinterpret the population cycles? Are the population cycles an active colonization mechanism? Wherein population cycles are called invasion pulses, so could they be an active mechanism?
Well, I don't know exactly what this is referring to. The idea of overpopulation triggering the exploration for new territory certainly makes sense. It's missing a step because it is unnecessary. You can build wanderlust in at any level of proximity to carrying capacity. If it's desirable, having to overshoot the carrying capacity in order to motivate people or creatures to move is wasteful. So it doesn't have the look of an adaptation. The wanderlust does, and that it would be triggered by overpopulation.
Mm-hmm.
But the overpopulation does not have the look of an adaptation.
A totally different topic. I saw a sticker on a car that read, MILF, Man, I Love Frogs, with an image of one. It reminded me of someone we know. Now I'll be looking for one that begins, Man, I Love Lizards, Man, I Love Leopards.
I have to say, I think civilization went wrong and possibly unrecoverably wrong.
That was the moment.
At MILF.
Yeah, that was the branching point.
It's such a despicable concept.
Yeah.
That anyway, I don't necessarily need to see it resurrected around love of frogs, but it is better than the original meaning.
Yeah. You can be sure that if 2001 was written in 2023, we'd know Hal's pronouns.
Yeah.
Here's a suggestion on the topic of AI. Please consider interviewing Rob Miles from Computer File.
Okay.
No.
No,
You know that?
I don't.
Okay. Just screenshot that. We may apply gender to things seen as conscious because we have two sexes.
Yep. Absolutely. We impose it.
Yeah, we impose it. I think it's an error, but I'm not certain of that. It feels like it opens up the room for confusion, and then for that confusion to be taken advantage of, as it is. But I think that may be part of why it exists.
I think you're right, and I also think that there is potentially a protective, going through the formal exercise of making sure that you call the AI it, and not he or she, is probably useful because it forces you to consciously recognize that you don't know what that thing is, but if there's one thing it isn't, it's
not a he or a she.
It's not a descendant of the same tree of life.
Right. Yes, that's right. Do LLMs not just help us understand the limits of language as a culturally evolved model of reality? There are other modes of communication.
Kinda. The thing about language is that it so far outstrips the next nearest competitor. And even to the extent that you can come up with an argument for the next nearest competitor being better than I'm giving it credit for, it's in the context of creatures that have language. And so, yes, I can learn to communicate something very complex to you without saying anything, but it's not as if that does not come on a substrate of having spoken. So anyway, the thing about language is it allows you to transmit abstractions between minds so that they can be parallel processed. Nothing else does that, right? At least not regularly. And if something else does it, it can't, you can't pick any abstraction and convey it some other mode. You might have an abstraction that you could convey, but in other words, language is the thing that makes humans special. Is it totally without an analog elsewhere in the animal kingdom? No, but the point is the difference between language and the next nearest counterpart is so great that although it is a difference in degree, the difference in degree is so large as to make it a separate function. That does not feel like I've said that very clearly, but
no, I think this is important. I didn't understand the question the same way you did, but I think what you're saying here is very important. There are, of course, many modes of communication, and back to where we started with the Q&A, the various ways that we sense the universe are, reflective of real things that can be sensed in the universe. So, but the sensing is entirely receptive, and communication, of course, requires both a signaler and a receiver. And language, which now can sometimes be visual, but usually is using audio, requires not just that there's the ability to produce, but also to receive the sound, and then all of the complexity there. Smell just doesn't have the complexity possible for it to it.
Yeah.
Touch could communicate a tremendous amount, but the abstraction is not there.
You'd have to use language. You could convey things by, making letters with your fingers, but the point is you're then borrowing from the language module. So it's inconceivable that another mode does what language does. And I would also just point out that this is obvious in the sense that it takes a human being, a decade to gain even moderate facility with this mode, right? That's not idle time. That's not like, the tongue takes that long to develop to be able to make the sounds. You have to learn the subtleties of how to convey things, and it's not easy, right? It's a slow process.
Yeah. Okay, let's do 2 more questions here. What is the evolutionary explanation for psychiatric conditions? What are the evolutionary advantages of psychiatric conditions? It's such a giant category.
You got to be very careful not to assume that because there is something called a psychiatric condition that you assume it's an adaptation. The thing about adaptations is they are the result of a process that allows them to spread and to be augmented. And many of the things that we call psychological conditions are dysfunctions. They are the opposite of adaptations. And, it's very tempting because somebody who has schizophrenia may produce something creative to say, oh, it's an adaptation, and we treat it as if it's a dysfunction. Now, it's a genuine dysfunction, which doesn't mean that it doesn't open doors every now and again. But anyway, there's a category error with adaptations and dysfunction.
Okay, but still, explanation. So it may just be dysfunction, right?
Well, yes, although we make the argument in our book that many of these disorders have, let's take schizophrenia, for example, has a surprising overlap with the symptoms of sleep. That is to say, when you sleep, you may believe that a narrative is unfolding that isn't. You have conversations with people who don't exist. You may be paranoid that someone is after you. All of those things, if they happen to you when you're asleep, it's followed up by usually amnesia. There was paralysis while it happened, and so you just kind of ignore it. But the point is, nope, you were either stark raving mad while you were asleep, or there's an adaptive explanation for it while you're asleep, and it happens that the same stuff affects you when you're awake. And when it does, we call it schizophrenia or hallucinations that are the result of having taken an entheogen. The fact that those 3 things have the same set of symptoms is suggestive that schizophrenia and probably bipolar disorder are the dream circuitry, which is adaptive, running at a time that it shouldn't when you're awake.
You think bipolar too?
Yeah, I do. In any case, something like that. You've got an adaptive circuit running where it shouldn't, right? And that would explain the pattern and the hint of an adaptation in something that's clearly dysfunctional.
All right. Final question. Is there an evolutionary case to be made against humans eating bugs?
Is there an evolutionary case? Clearly not, because there are many cultures that do eat their share of bugs, and even
and
so-called.
sometimes other people share as well. You said they eat their share of bugs.
Oh.
Even though a lot of us aren't eating any bugs, they probably eat more
They're
than their
probably
share.
eating our share of bugs. Yes. And, our culture, to the extent that our culture is even a thing, eats bugs of the sea, arthropods of the sea, even if not terrestrial insects.
Not technically insects, but arthropods. Yes, absolutely.
So anyway, none of this is an argument for us industrializing the scale of bug production and inflicting it on people with propaganda.
Right.
But no, I don't think there can be no argument against any bug eating, given the number of human cultures in which some bug eating goes on.
Yeah. I mean, I think we answered some question about bug eating before, insect eating before, and someone said, but what about the chitin? Like, I have not looked into it, and I thought, well, it's possible the chitin isn't good for you, that it's, it makes sharp little bits in your gut and might cause some little micro perforations. I don't know. On the other hand, a lot of the bug eating that happens, say, in Amazonia, for instance, tends to be larval forms, right?
Pretty grubby.
Very grubby, very, very grubby, or like the meaty, the body meat of like big juicy spiders, like tarantulas.
Yum.
Like, I don't want to eat that. I don't want to have to eat that. I have, I have tried some bugs. Actually, just when I was in Mexico, I met a couple of people, and we went to a mezcal bar and got a little appetizer of, it was like deep fried ants or something, and it just tasted crunchy. It's like, this is fine. I don't think this is bad for me. I don't think it's good for me. I think it's ants.
Yep.
I'd rather eat those than the body of a tarantula.
Yeah. I hear ya. Tarantula farming is slow.
Oh God.
But anyway, I would say, if it's the hard parts of their bodies, there's all kinds of technologies for pulverizing stuff. But again, large scale is different than occasional or long-standing bug eating traditions.
Yeah, and there are no cultures. I am highly confident this is true. There are no cultures where insects provide the majority of protein in their diet.
Right.
Like there are plenty of cultures where insects are a regular piece of their diet, or there might even be a few things that are delicacies that we would not regard as delicacies at all. And of course, that's going to be true across, for lots of things besides insects. Whereas, there are lots of pastoralist cultures that rely on having domesticated mammals usually and eating mostly the flesh and blood of those mammals. There aren't dedicated insectivorous human cultures. That's not a thing.
Right. And there are some cultures that have a taboo against eating insects, like the elite of Davos. They do not eat insects. They think that we will eat insects while we are delighting over not owning anything and being so happy.
I'll bet some of them would eat some forms in some very specialized contexts.
No, I think mostly what it is.
I mean, these are people who like escargot.
Oh, sure. That is very different. No, my feeling is the elite of Davos
I don't want to eat snails.
Would agree to eat a very small number of insects in exchange for our agreeing to own nothing and be happy. That's the circumstances in which we will find those people eating insects, and otherwise I don't think so.
You may be right. All right. We'll be back next week. Same time, same place, with a Q&A next week as well. And in the meantime, check out Natural Selections, check out our book, Hunter Gatherer's Guide. Come find us at 11 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow, Sunday, March, what's that going to be, the 26th? When at my Patreon, we have a live private Q&A. We get to interact with you guys who are watching live, and then we leave it up if you want to catch it later. And until then, until we see you next time. Be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
Be well, everyone.